Welcome to the latest episode of Five on the Floor on the Five Reasons Sports Network. Thanks for joining us on your favorite podcast app. We're on Podbean, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts. We're also on Dash Radio on their Nothing But Net channel every single weeknight at 7 p.m. Also, make sure you hit the like and subscribe buttons at Five Reasons YouTube channel. Did a big stream there tonight. If you weren't subscribed, you didn't know about it. Five Reasons YouTube. FiveReasonsSports.com. Get the latest takeaways from Brady Hawk and others and some of our other contributors on the other sports. And check out the great sponsors of the Five Reasons Sports Network. That includes prizepicks.com. That's our official fantasy sponsor. Use that code 5 FIVE. If you're into MLB, this is a perfect time. Obviously, Stanley Cup playoffs are over, but you can do the NFL futures right now. They're all up on the board. So go to Prize Picks, use the code 5 FIVE, get your initial deposit matched up to $100 if you use that code FIVE. Play 2, 3, 4, 5 players together. You can play across different sports. That is the fantasy partner that we recommend. Also, if you're looking for CBD, therapistpreferred.com. Use the code 5RSN. That's the number 5RSN. 25% off the gummy, the tincture, the sports cream at therapistpreferred.com. And now, tonight's episode.
Down the bitch gang. Yikes. 5 on the floor. Ride for my dogs. Where here's the thing. You can check the score. Hustle hard, couple scars, wearing rubber frauds. Just like Bucker said, you in trouble, y'all. Kept the floor playing. Got it all banned. Y'all seen the block. Stop with one hand. And Pat we trust. Inspire have the guts. We're here to bring the heat. Y'all can hang it up.
Welcome to Five on the Floor, a daily insider show on the Miami Heat and the NBA, featuring Ethan Skolnick, Greg Sylvander, and Alex Toledo, plus others from the Five Reasons Sports Network.
All right, Ethan Skolnick back on Five on the Floor, a little bit beyond midnight. Already heard from Pat Riley. Adam Simon's going to speak at some point here. We also heard from Nikola Jovic, right? Is that correct? Did I get that right? Nikola Jovic, not Nikola Jokic. So a little bit different there, although some similar skill sets here. We're talking about 6'10", 6'11" guy who can pass, who can shoot, shot 36% from three, and again, in Serbia. But again, not necessarily the type of player we thought Pat Riley would pick, to the point that Pat Riley was actually pressured by the great Barry Jackson about a draft pick from 27 years ago, Martin Bursep, that basically kept Pat from drafting any foreign players after that because it was such a bust, although he did bring in Sasha Danilovic. But as Pat said, we played Goran Dragic, right? So he said, if a player can play, I don't care where he's from. But again, a little bit of a different player than we anticipated, more of a stretch four type player that they didn't really have on the roster last year. They do have Yurt. That's not really his style at this stage. And again, we're waiting right now for some of the undrafted free agents, and some of those might end up being as interesting as the guy that the Heat actually drafted, because we know that a lot of those were on the Heat's workout list. So we may not get those by the time this episode is over with, but we certainly will have them over the next 24 hours. But I just want to go to you guys first. First the floor plan tonight. Got Alex Toledo. I've got Brady Hawk. We're both at the arena following the Tropical Blanket and the Brady Hawk 305. I'll just start here. I'll go to you first, Alex. In terms of what the Heat, you don't always draft for need. I mean, sometimes you draft for a player with the highest upside. The Heat have gone both ways over the years, but typically they make upside picks, or they like a guy maybe that another team may not like. They had conviction on Tyler Hero that other teams really didn't have. They had conviction maybe on Bam a little bit higher than some other teams had. Picked both of those guys at 13 and 14. Go all the way back to the draft selection of Dwayne Wade, who came in as a 2-guard. When you already had Eddie Jones, they moved Dwayne to point guard. So typically Pat will go for the player he likes, not necessarily position. But this is not necessarily the type of player we thought they would take, because he's not defense first.
Yeah, definitely. I think this was another surprising draft pick by the Heat, and I think it's just another one in a long line of surprising draft picks. Like when you go back to, I think even as far as just like ever since the summer where LeBron left, since they got Shabazz, like they just, ever since then, it's been a lot of guys who maybe Heat fans don't expect them to pick, right? The Justice thing was like, yeah, he fell down there. But then you talk about Tyler, you talk about Bam, you talk about Precious. There was a lot of mixed reactions and a lot of surprise reactions from media and fans alike. And I think this is another one that fits right there. Like, I think you were talking about how they will usually, go for the high ceiling player. And I feel like what they did tonight, the more that I think about it, is kind of an in-between where it's like, this guy won't be playing much, if at all, this season. He's not going to be some guy that they plug and play in right away, but He does kind of fit the mold of the player that they might be looking for in free agency. I know, via trade for Duncan Robinson, in the sense that like this guy is a forward who can shoot the hell out of the ball. He's got guard skills at 6'11". It's a really intriguing pick. It's obviously a high upside project type of player, like I said, who's not going to play right away, but it's kind of like towing that balance a little bit, where it's like you needed a four who can space the floor. He can do that. He's got some interesting ball skills. He's got a step back, like he can shoot over the top of people. He seems to be a pretty smart player in general. The defense stuff is definitely a concern, but the fact that he's 6'11", 19 years old, and seems to be very skilled, has been playing in a professional league, like the pick has sat with me pretty well. The more that I've sat with the thought of them having done this, it was surprising, but I can kind of see the intrigue.
No, I can agree. I think the intriguing part is that we talk about ceiling or current skill, but like when you have a guy that can be the ball handler in a pick and roll and also be a roller in a pick and roll, like I feel like that's something that's always kind of striking when a guy's also like 6'10". Like we saw him when you probably all the people listening immediately went to YouTube and looked at his highlights. You see both of those things. You see him have a tight handle at least. You see the turnaround jumper stuff. You see the strong attacking. Like there's a lot of stuff to like offensively, especially the passing. I think that's kind of the bigger thing, which always seems to happen, that these guys that can pass at that type of size is just really it's a treat to have as a certain player. But the thing comes down to is the part that makes me think of why this draft pick was made that threw it off a little bit was the defensive stuff. Like if you listen to Pat Riley in recent press conferences, it's defense, defense, defense. The guys that don't play defense, he talks about them needing to play better defense. And this is a guy that he's physical. I think that's a good trait to have, but there's not much there, I guess, defensively yet. He did mention when he was talking that he thinks he could be a big guard who can switch everything. It's good to say that if he's going to be playing, if he was to be able to play next to Bam, which I think he can be, Bam's a guy that can plug up a lot of his holes if it comes down to it. So I think that's a positive thing. But looking individually, even Pat Riley joked around saying it's another guy that could possibly get picked on individually. So we'll see how that goes. But I think not to focus on the negatives, just really is a lot offensively to like as a positive stuff. Like there's a lot of stuff you could look at. I think there's upside there. Going for a big, I think it makes a whole lot more sense. Looking at some of the guards that were there, I think there were some really good talents there, but going for a guard just didn't make much sense to me in this draft. Like it really didn't. I thought a wing made a lot more sense, but a big is just, for one, you have a guy that maybe can battle it out with Omer and whoever else comes in through free agency. And there's also the element of if there is a big trade that goes down and you have to throw Omer in as a sweetener, you have another guy down the pipeline to kind of utilize. So I think there's some positives to it. And eventually, I guess they're going to have the Twin Towers in Summer League with him and Omer.
Well, yeah, and then they're going to want the Twin Towers. Heat fans going to want the Twin Towers during the regular season, or the Triple Towers with Bam out there too. Just throw all the bigs together. Eric Spoelstra will walk off the court. But look, he's an interesting prospect. I don't know necessarily that he's a prospect you would anticipate being a rotation player on a championship contending type team, and that's why, although I think he's going to be here, and a lot of us thought that they would trade out of the pick. I don't think there's any guarantee that he's going to be there. I just think that's good. But I think the other point is, and you made this point, Brady, as we were walking in here, Yurtseven has been, talked about as kind of a sweetener in some trades because he has potential. This is a guy who would give you another big option there. And the Heat have had more trouble developing bigs than they have developing wings and guards or shooters and guards in general. So adding a big that you like, it makes some sense. I think they're going to get a couple of these guys in undrafted, situations anyway. So I don't know that this is necessarily, one way or the other, like a make or break pick for this franchise. I don't think there was anything there that were like, oh, wow, they should have taken that. There have been certain nights. I go back to one night when Draymond Green was available, and I wrote a column that night saying they should have taken Draymond Green. There were a lot of teams that should have done that because I thought he was a perfect fit for that particular Big Three Heat team because he was kind of a plug and play guy right out of college with leadership ability and defensive chops, which we've seen. I don't think that this guy existed in this draft. And so I'm okay with an upside potential play, particularly with a big, but I wouldn't guarantee that this is necessarily somebody that's going to be here for the long term. We keep framing everything. This is the Jimmy Butler build. The Jimmy Butler build has a timeline. Omer is a lot older than this guy. He came in older. And we saw that Omer, when he was thrown into the mix last year, had good moments and he had other moments where he was unplayable. So I think that, again, Heat fans should temper their expectations on this, even if they can like the upside. I do want to get into a couple things here after the break real quick. And again, it's going to be a quick episode. We've been here late, and we do want to get you something. If you want to get into a little bit more analysis on this, a lot of our guys were on the YouTube channel tonight, and you should catch the stream and kind of all this sort of lead up to that. Unfortunately, I couldn't join that because I couldn't figure out my headphones. We do want to tell you about one more sponsor here at the 5 Reasons Sports Network. It's our friend Mark Brown, markbrownpa.com, 954-566-5678, 954-566-5678. He's the guy to go to if you need an estate plan. And if you are someone who has a family, you need an estate plan. Make sure your money goes to the right place. He can do it for you easily, get you all the forms. He will not overcharge you. He'll work with you. I can tell you this because he did mine. Go to markbrownpa.com, M-A-R-C, brownpa.com. He's based in North Lauderdale, just around Cypress Creek Road and Andrews, 954-566-5678, 954-566-5678. All right. Again, do we have the undrafted free agents yet? No, they haven't come in yet. All right. So one thing I just wanted to kind of get into here with this is that I do think that if this guy ends up developing, he feels like a Spoelstra player to a certain degree, that there's some shooting ability, there's some flexibility with this kid. And I just want to mention that because I do always think that even though Pat and Eric have this very good, healthy working relationship, they have different philosophies on a lot of this stuff. And I have noticed of late, like, well, some people say that's not a Pat Riley guy. Last year, they spent the offseason bringing in Pat Riley type players, the PJ Tuckers and all the rest of this. I do think sometimes there's a little bit of give, and maybe you bring in more of an Eric Spoelstra player. So when people say, well, I couldn't see Pat drafting a foreign player, as he said, they do send Adam Simon, Chet Kammerer, and Keith Askins overseas for a reason. I mean, it's not just, to get the miles. Okay. So they do look at these players, but this felt to me a little bit more like some Spo influence. And I know Eric doesn't really watch a ton of college basketball until the season is over, and his season went, I doubt he watched very much at all this year. Okay. Just based on previous conversations with it, but this just strikes me as a player that Eric might be able to feel he could unlock. Anything else before we close in a minute each about the draft as a whole, just beyond the Heat? I'll start with Brady.
Well, I'll say this is going to be kind of bad podcast structure because it hasn't happened yet. And if you're listening to this, you probably have seen the undrafted stuff, but it's coming down to the end, and there's going to be a lot, as you mentioned before, a lot of the guys they worked out are going to fall undrafted. It's just the way it is. There's guys that who knows who the next 4 picks will be, but guys like Justin Lewis or Keon Ellis are 2 guys that are very high level basketball players, and it's clear that the Miami Heat like them. So it'll be interesting to see if they can bring them in. But as a whole, I just feel like looking at 27 and looking at these undrafted guys, like there just feels like this is a draft where there's just not a big talent gap overall. Like even when you look in the teens and go down, and a guy like EJ Liddell falls all the way down, he was sitting there available at 27, as well as a Kentucky point guard in Ty Washington, who I think those were the 2 guys we were focused on. But much like always happens, it's never the guy that we're expecting. So as a whole, it just feels like this type of draft that feeds into the Miami Heat, like guys that they can find talent, diamonds in the rough, because there's going to be a bunch of them. And then maybe they can try to strike on this pick in Jovic. And just to hit on the thing you're talking about with Spoelstra, I think this is a big thing is, for one, it's tough to say because he's big in defense as well and switching and all that stuff. And we know bigger guys get played off the floor, which I don't think is him totally. Like I'm just saying in terms of just full out switching defensively that he's big on defense, but offensively, I don't think there's a coach that would deny a big passing first step back shooting 6'11" guy. Like it's just hard to deny that as a coach. So if you're Eric Spoelstra looking forward, or even Malik Allen, who's going to be running the summer league team, like that is something to really utilize, I guess, moving forward. So it's just, I don't think it's the draft that we expected, but I think it's pretty intriguing one just looking forward.
Intriguing is definitely the word, and that's just kind of how I feel when I think about the guy that they ended up drafting. It's just so interesting that they ended up going with him, and it feels like, again, like I was talking about earlier, them striking a balance where it's like, yeah, they're getting this 19-year-old guy who everybody considers a project, but he's also very skilled for a 19-year-old. So it's like also a 6'11" dude who's pulling up off the dribble from deep range. Like it's just, he's got a very intriguing skill set for a player to get at 27, because it's like it feels like he could be a player who contributes but just not right away. And so regarding what Ethan was talking about there, and him not being somebody who could be here long term. He is not thinking about that. He's over here talking about bringing the championship back to the city, as he just said. And, you know, I'm very intrigued with the whole pick, and I'm very intrigued with what Brady was talking about as far as the undrafted guys. I've always said, you know, I'm not a big draft guy. I'm not going to pretend I am. I crammed a lot of these dudes last second just to make sure I was up on everybody. And really, a lot of those guys, like Brady said, that they worked out are still going to be available. I'm very interested in Jabari Walker. I'm very interested in Lewis. I'm very interested in Trevion Williams. I think Keon Ellis is still out there. Like a lot of those guys that they worked out are still out there. And I think they might be able to, you know, get a few of them. I would be very excited if we could get some of the ones that I just named. And, you know, it's just always exciting when the Heat are able to get some young guys that maybe you're not particularly expecting. But, man, like they might be able to get some decent ones here, right?
Yeah, like and obviously the kid knows how to pander already. That's my other close is the only NBA game he says he's ever been to live was Heat 76ers. He said it was a great atmosphere, so he'll already fit in. We'll see who some of the undrafted guys are that Alex and Brady are talking about. We'll probably get into those on a podcast either tomorrow or over the weekend as we go forward. What happened? Something happened? All right. Well, see, Alex just jinxed the whole thing. Jabari Walker was just taken. All right. You know, it's late. We're tired. Nikola Jovic, not Jokic, Jovic. He was drafted higher than Jokic. That means he's going to be better. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you for listening to the Five on the Floor on the Five Regional Sports Network.